Elena sat in the corner of the train carriage, holding her small suitcase tightly against her chest. The train rattled over the long tracks, shaking slightly with every turn, but it wasn't the sound or the movement that kept her awake. It was the fear, quiet but strong, that had lived inside her heart ever since she agreed to become a mail-order bride for a man she had never met. The letters she received from the cowboy named Caleb were kind and short, but she couldn't stop her mind from imagining the worst. She had heard too many stories from other women who had traveled west searching for a better life, but ended up in homes where they were treated like workers, not wives. Some had met men who shouted, some had met men who controlled every hour of their day, and some had simply been forgotten on lonely farms. Elena worried she might be walking into the same fate. The countryside outside the train windows stretched endlessly. Wide plains, scattered hills, small wooden stations that passed by too fast to remember. Every mile felt heavier. She tried to take slow breaths, reminding herself that there was no turning back now. She had made her decision because she had no real choice left. Her life back home had grown too difficult. After losing her parents, she had struggled to survive on the small wages she earned doing sewing work. The landlord had raised the rent again, and the neighbors whispered that she should marry quickly to secure a place to stay. But no man in her town truly wanted her. They wanted a woman who would manage their homes and care for their livestock from dawn to night. Elena did not fear work, but she feared living without respect. When she first read Caleb's letters, she noticed something unusual. He had not asked for a woman skilled in cleaning, sewing, or cooking. He had simply written that he hoped to find someone who wanted a fresh start, someone who wanted a peaceful home. At first, she thought it was too good to be true. Why would a cowboy living so far from town want a stranger as a companion? Why would he write with such gentleness? She wondered if it was a trick. Still, she answered him, slowly building the courage to take the biggest step of her life. The train finally slowed for her stop. She stood, her knees shaking so much she had to grip the seat to steady herself. When the train doors opened, a cold breeze hit her face, carrying the scent of dust, pine trees, and distant livestock. The station was small, just a wooden platform and one bench that had lost most of its paint. Only a few people stepped off. Her eyes scanned the platform, searching for the cowboy she had seen only in one small photograph he had sent. Caleb stood a few steps away from the station building, tall and quiet, with his hat tilted slightly forward. He looked exactly as she expected, a man shaped by work in the sun, with a strong frame and calm eyes. But something in his expression surprised her. He didn't look impatient or proud. He looked soft, as if he was worried about her. Elena took a slow step toward him. He approached with careful movements, as though he didn't want to frighten her. When he reached her, he touched the brim of his hat politely. "You must be Elena," he said in a calm voice. She nodded, unable to speak at first. Her hands tightened around her suitcase. She expected him to take the suitcase from her immediately, but he didn't. He simply waited for her to feel ready. "It's a long ride to the ranch," he said gently. "We should get going whenever you feel comfortable." She swallowed, still nervous. When she finally whispered, "I'm ready," he nodded and led her toward a wagon pulled by two sturdy horses. He helped her place her suitcase carefully in the back, making sure nothing fell over. Not once did he rush her. The wagon ride was quiet at first. Elena kept her eyes on her hands, twisting her fingers together. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he expected from her. Caleb didn't press her with questions. He simply guided the horses down the dirt road, his hands steady on the reins. After several minutes, he spoke gently. "I know this can't be easy for you, traveling so far to meet someone you only know through letters." She nodded slightly but didn't reply. She was still too unsure to open her heart. Caleb did not push for a conversation. He returned to silence, giving her the space she needed. The road stretched long, passing fields of grass and small clusters of wildflowers. Birds flew low over the open land, and Elena watched them, wishing she felt as free as they seemed. When they reached his ranch, Elena felt her stomach twist again. The ranch was larger than she expected. There was a wide barn, a field of grazing cattle, and a wooden house with a porch that wrapped around the front. Everything looked clean and well kept. It didn't seem like the home of a man who lacked care or discipline. It looked like a place built with patience. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, stepping back to give her space. "I cleaned the guest room for you," he said softly. "You can stay there while you settle in." Guest room, not shared room, not demands, not assumptions. The word eased a small part of her fear. Inside, the house smelled like fresh wood and warm bread. Elena's eyes moved across the room. Simple furniture, a few books stacked neatly, a quiet fire in the fireplace. It was not a place of chaos. It felt safe, though her heart didn't fully believe it yet. Caleb led her to the guest room and stopped at the doorway. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said. "I don't want you to feel rushed or uncomfortable." She nodded again, still quiet, still unsure. When he left her to settle in, she slowly unpacked her things, folding her clothes neatly into the small dresser. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked tired, her eyes filled with worry. She wondered if this house would become a home or another place where she lived in fear. That evening, Caleb prepared a simple meal and invited her to eat. She took small bites, unsure whether she should serve him or wait for instructions. When she stood to clear the table afterward, he gently stopped her. "You don't need to work tonight," he said softly. "You traveled a long way. Rest." She almost didn't understand his words. No man she had known before had told her to rest. That night, lying in the small bed, Elena stared at the ceiling. She felt safe physically, but her mind kept warning her to stay careful. Kindness could disappear. Patience could turn into anger. She had seen it in other households. She didn't know if this man was truly different. But she remembered how gently he had looked at her when she stepped off the train, how he had not taken her suitcase without asking, how he spoke softly, as if he understood her fears. She turned onto her side and pulled the blanket up to her chin. She wasn't ready to trust yet, but for the first time since leaving her old life, she thought maybe, just maybe, this journey could lead to something better. Outside her window, she heard footsteps on the porch. Caleb was closing the shutters against the night wind. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb her. That small act, simple but thoughtful, stayed with her long after he went back inside. Elena finally closed her eyes, still nervous but not completely frightened anymore. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she promised herself she would take it one step at a time. She had traveled far with a heart full of fear, but somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of hope had begun to form. And though she didn't know it yet, the cowboy who waited downstairs carried the same hope, that she would not just come to his ranch, but someday feel safe enough to stay. The next morning, Elena woke before sunrise. The sky outside her small window was still dark, but she rose anyway, guided by the old habit of waking early to work. She quietly washed her face, braided her hair, and stepped out of the guest room. The house felt silent, as if even the walls were still asleep. She walked into the kitchen, planning to prepare breakfast before Caleb arrived, hoping it would show her gratitude. She moved softly, careful not to make noise. She found flour, water, and eggs placed neatly on the counter, and she began to cook as quickly as she could. Halfway through kneading the dough, she heard footsteps behind her. She froze, expecting him to ask why she was up so early, or worse, to tell her she should have done more the previous night. Instead, Caleb's voice came gently from the doorway. "You don't have to wake up this early," he said, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "You're still tired from traveling." Elena didn't turn around. Her hands trembled slightly. She kept kneading the dough, afraid to stop. "I didn't want to be lazy," she whispered. "I thought you might need breakfast early." Caleb stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "I'm used to making my own breakfast," he said. "You can rest as long as you need." She nodded slowly, still unsure. She continued cooking until everything was ready, then stepped back, letting him serve himself. Caleb approached the table and looked at the food with a soft expression. "This looks good," he said. "Thank you." She sat across from him, eating quietly, waiting for some kind of instruction. But he didn't give any. He asked simple questions: how her sleep was, whether she liked the room, if she needed anything from town. She answered carefully, always worried she might say the wrong thing. After breakfast, Elena stood to clean the table. She moved quickly, afraid that any hesitation might look like laziness. As she reached for the plates, her hand bumped a cup, sending it rolling across the wooden table and falling onto the floor with a soft thud. It didn't break, but Elena froze instantly. Her breath caught as she waited for Caleb to react. She bent down to pick it up, but Caleb was already kneeling beside her. He picked up the cup with calm hands and set it on the counter. Then he looked at her, his expression gentle, not angry. "It's all right," he said. "Accidents happen." Elena didn't meet his eyes. She whispered, "I'm sorry," her voice unsteady. "There's nothing to be sorry for," he replied softly. He stood and continued clearing the table without another word. Elena watched him with surprise. She didn't understand how he could remain so calm. Her heart beat fast, but slowly it began to settle. She realized she had expected a shout, a complaint, or at least a disappointed sigh, but none came. After breakfast, Caleb put on his hat and boots. "I'll be working with the horses this morning," he said. "You don't need to help. You can explore the house or rest." She nodded but didn't respond. When he walked out the door, she exhaled deeply. The silence that filled the house afterward was heavy. Without anyone watching her, she finally allowed her shoulders to drop. She felt tired, not just from travel, but from carrying so much fear. But Elena did not rest. She walked around the house, noticing things that needed cleaning. She wiped the tables, swept the floor, washed the dishes, and organized the shelves. She didn't know what Caleb expected, but she believed keeping everything perfect might keep him happy. When Caleb returned around noon, he found her on her knees scrubbing the wooden floor with a cloth. Her sleeves were rolled up and her hair stuck to the side of her face. She looked exhausted. "Elena," he said gently, stepping inside, "you don't have to do all this today." She looked up, confused. "The house was dusty," she said quietly. "I didn't want you to think I wasn't useful." Caleb set down the tools he carried. He crouched beside her, lowering himself slowly so he wouldn't startle her. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "I didn't bring you here to work like this." Elena lowered her eyes. "I don't want to make mistakes," she whispered. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He didn't touch her, but his voice held a different kind of strength, gentle but honest. "You won't make me angry by resting," he said. "I promise you that." She nodded again, but deep inside she was still unsure. Fear does not disappear in a day. Caleb helped her stand up and took the cleaning cloth from her hands. "Let me finish this," he said. "You take a break." She hesitated at the doorway of the kitchen, watching him clean part of the floor she had been working on. Her mind couldn't understand it. Why would a man do such work when he had a wife, even if she wasn't truly his wife yet? Why wasn't he irritated by the uneven scrub marks she had left? Why didn't he question her effort? She eventually sat on the porch, hugging herself as she watched the open land. The ranch was wide and peaceful, with cattle grazing calmly and birds circling lazily in the sky. She began to understand that this place was not like the crowded streets she had come from. It was quiet, not the frightening kind of quiet, but a peaceful one. When Caleb finished cleaning, he joined her outside with 2 cups of warm tea. He placed one gently beside her and sat on the other end of the bench, leaving enough space not to overwhelm her. "Do you like the ranch?" he asked softly. She looked out at the fields. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's so large and clean." Caleb smiled slightly. "It took years to build it this way." She took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth spread through her hands. She still didn't know what to talk about. Every word felt like a careful step on thin ice. Caleb didn't fill the silence with heavy questions. Instead, he talked about the horses, the cattle, the nearby town, and the seasons. His voice was low and even, never sharp, never forceful. Hours passed without her realizing. For the first time since arriving, she felt a little less tense. She still wasn't comfortable, but she wasn't terrified either. That evening, she cooked dinner. She didn't know whether she should, but she wanted to repay the peace she felt that afternoon. As she cooked, Caleb set the table, moving quietly to avoid disturbing her thoughts. When they ate, he thanked her again, making sure she knew her effort was appreciated, not demanded. After dinner, Elena tried to wash the dishes quickly, but her arms felt heavier than before. The long day had drained her strength. Her hands slipped, and she dropped a plate, not breaking it, but letting it clatter loudly against the counter. She flinched instantly, expecting a harsh reaction. But Caleb was already beside her, gently taking the plate from her shaking hands. "You're tired," he said kindly. "Let me take over." "I can finish," she whispered stubbornly, feeling ashamed. "You've done enough for today," he said calmly. "More than enough." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't disappointed. It was protective in a quiet way. Elena stepped back, unsure how to respond. She watched him wash the dishes with slow, steady movements. Water dripped off his hands and bubbles clung to his sleeves. It was such a simple action, yet it felt powerful because it showed who he truly was. She returned to her room that night feeling confused, not scared, not fully safe, but caught in between. She sat on the bed and touched her chest softly. Her heartbeat was steadier than the night before. Later, she heard him moving around the house, closing windows and checking the doors. His footsteps were soft, almost respectful, as if he didn't want to disturb her rest. She listened to the sounds and wondered what kind of man did things this gently. She lay down, staring at the ceiling. She still didn't trust easily. But she could not deny that something inside her had shifted. She had expected a man who demanded everything. Instead, she found someone who asked for nothing. Elena slowly closed her eyes, letting the quiet ranch settle around her. A small voice inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, Caleb meant every kind word he said. And for the first time, she wondered if this house could someday feel like more than a place of fear. Maybe it could become a home where she could breathe freely, speak without trembling, and live without hiding her heart. One day at a time, she told herself. One day at a time. The next few days passed gently, but Elena still lived with quiet tension in her shoulders. She tried to hide it, but Caleb noticed the way she jumped at sudden sounds, the way she always checked his expression before speaking, and the way she worked faster than she needed to, as if she were afraid of falling behind. He didn't confront her about it because he understood that fear did not disappear when someone told it to go away. Fear left slowly, step by step, and only when a person felt completely safe. Caleb spent those days doing ranch work while Elena handled the house in smaller amounts. She still woke early, but he encouraged her to rest after completing little tasks instead of exhausting herself. Each time she sat down too quickly, as if she needed permission, he assured her gently that she had already done enough. He didn't lecture her. He didn't correct her. He simply repeated the kindness she needed to hear. One afternoon, while Caleb worked with the horses in the yard, he noticed Elena by the porch. She stood there with her hands held close to her chest, watching him work. Her expression held curiosity mixed with worry, as if she wanted to ask something but didn't dare to. Caleb offered her a small smile. "Would you like to see the horses up close?" he asked. Elena shook her head quickly. "I don't want to be in your way." "You won't be," he replied calmly. "They're gentle. Like big children, really." She hesitated again, but her feet slowly carried her forward. When she reached him, she stayed a few steps back, unsure. The horse closest to her was a chestnut mare with curious eyes. Caleb placed his hand gently on the mare's neck. "This is Hazel," he explained. "She's one of the calmest we have." Elena watched the horse breathe slowly, its warm breath fogging in the cool air. She whispered, "She's beautiful." "She likes meeting new people," Caleb said. "You can touch her if you want." Elena lifted her hand, but at the last second she pulled it back. Caleb noticed and stepped slightly aside, giving her more space. "No pressure," he said. "Just when you feel ready." A moment passed, then another. Finally, Elena reached out again. Her hand brushed Hazel's neck, and the mare leaned gently into her touch. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A small smile formed on her face, soft, real, almost shy. Caleb watched quietly, glad she was experiencing a moment without fear. For a long time, she stood there, stroking Hazel's neck, feeling the calmness of the animal. It was the first time since arriving that she seemed fully present, not lost in worries. Later that evening, after dinner, Elena washed the dishes with slower movements than before. She wasn't rushing, and Caleb noticed. She still worked carefully, but the fear-driven speed had softened. When she dried the last plate, he approached her gently. "You did a lot today," he said. "Why don't you sit for a bit? The porch is cool tonight." Elena hesitated. She never knew if invitations were expectations, but Caleb never used force in his voice, so she nodded, wiped her hands, and followed him outside. The porch was quiet, with only the soft sound of wind brushing through the tall grass. Fireflies blinked in the distance, and the sky stretched across the land like a deep blue blanket filled with silver stars. Caleb leaned against the railing, keeping his distance to avoid making her uncomfortable. Elena clasped her hands together, sitting on the bench. It took her a while before she found the courage to speak. "Caleb," she said softly, "why did you ask for a bride? You seem like someone who can live alone." Caleb looked out at the open land. "I can live alone," he said. "I did for many years. But loneliness grows heavy after a while. People aren't meant to live their whole lives with no one to talk to at the end of the day." Elena listened quietly, not expecting the honesty. He continued, "This ranch is peaceful, but it can feel empty. I wrote to the agency because I wanted someone who wanted a new start, just like I did." Elena lowered her gaze. "I thought you might want someone to manage everything for you." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not looking for someone to serve me. I'm looking for someone to share life with. Someone who wants to stay." His words were simple, but they hit her heart in a way she didn't expect. Stay, not serve, stay, not fear. She remembered the houses she had cleaned in her old town, the men who barked orders, the wives who lived with silent sorrow. She remembered the stories whispered by other girls, stories of men who offered promises and delivered bitterness. "How can you be so sure?" she asked quietly. You don't know me. Caleb turned his head slightly, meeting her uncertain eyes. No, I don't know everything about you, but I know you're someone who deserves peace. I saw that in your letters, and I see it now. She looked down quickly, feeling tears she didn't want him to see. She wasn't crying, but her heart felt tight, as if something inside her was cracking open. No one had ever spoken to her in this way, not with pity, but with understanding. Caleb continued. I grew up in a loud house. My father shouted often. My mother tried to keep peace, but it was hard for her. When I was old enough to leave, I promised myself I wouldn't carry that anger into my own home. Elena's breath caught. She lifted her head slightly. So you don't shout? Ever? He gave a small smile. I don't like raising my voice. I believe people listen better when they're spoken to with calm. For a moment, Elena didn't speak. The silence between them felt soft instead of heavy. She rested her hands on her lap and stared at the open land. Her thoughts were tangled, but one thing was clear. Caleb wasn't pretending. His voice held no hidden demands. His eyes held no frustration. He simply wanted her to feel safe. After a long pause, she said, I'm not used to this. I know, he replied gently. That's all right. Take your time. The wind blew lightly, lifting a strand of her hair. She brushed it behind her ear, her hands still shaking slightly. I don't know how to be what you expect. Caleb shook his head. I don't expect anything except honesty. Everything else can be figured out together. She looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. Not with fear, but with searching eyes. And for the first time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a man who would wait for her trust, no matter how long it took. When the night grew cooler, Caleb walked her inside and made sure the lamps were low so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. He wished her a good night before she entered her room, his voice quiet, almost tender. Inside, Elena sat on her bed, her heart full of thoughts. She touched the wooden frame beside her and whispered to herself, He's different. The words surprised her, but they felt true. She realized she hadn't flinched all day, not once. She had relaxed without noticing it. Fear was still there, but something else now lived beside it. Something new, something warm. Hope. Before she lay down, she whispered softly, Maybe I can stay. Not just in this house, but in this life he is offering. She closed her eyes, letting that small hope settle gently in her heart. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more moments where she tested her courage. But tonight, for the first time, she felt safe enough to dream. The morning after their quiet conversation on the porch, Elena woke with a different feeling in her chest. Fear was still there, but it wasn't the loud, overwhelming fear that had traveled with her on the train. Now it felt smaller, like a shadow that followed her but didn't control her steps. She stretched her arms slowly, surprised by how well she had slept. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she had closed her eyes without expecting a sudden harsh sound or a heavy voice calling her. She moved through the house with gentle steps. The sunlight poured through the windows, painting warm lines across the wooden floor. She found Caleb already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up, and the small smile that touched his lips was calm and natural. Morning, he said softly. Good morning, she replied, her voice steadier than before. He offered to make breakfast, but she shook her head with a small laugh. I can make it, she said. I feel rested today. Caleb didn't question her. He didn't rush to take over. He simply nodded and set his cup down. Elena prepared breakfast with no trembling hands, no rushing, no fear of dropping anything. She moved slowly, enjoying the quiet peace of the kitchen. She didn't even realize she was humming softly until Caleb noticed and smiled to himself, not wanting to interrupt her. They ate together with an ease that surprised them both. Caleb shared small stories about the ranch, and Elena added her own thoughts without checking his face before speaking. She wasn't fully comfortable yet, but something inside her had opened like a window letting in fresh air. After breakfast, Caleb suggested they visit the nearby town to get some supplies. Elena's first instinct was to hesitate. She barely knew the town, and she wasn't sure how people would react to seeing her with a stranger. But Caleb sensed her concern and said gently, "Only if you feel like going. There's no pressure." She thought about it, then nodded. "I would like to see the town." They rode on the wagon together, the horses trotting steadily over the dirt road. As they approached the town, Elena felt nervous again. People were everywhere, shopkeepers, children running, men loading goods onto wagons. She tightened her hands in her lap. Caleb noticed and slowed the horses. "You don't have to talk to anyone," he assured her. "We'll just get what we need and head back." The simple promise calmed her. When they walked into the general store, the owner greeted Caleb warmly, then glanced at Elena with polite curiosity. "This is Elena," Caleb said calmly. "My guest." He didn't push the word wife or bride. He chose the gentlest word he could because he knew how fragile trust could be. The owner nodded kindly. "Welcome," he said. Elena offered a small smile. She stayed close to Caleb as he collected flour, sugar, tools, and other necessities. When he handed her a small tin of tea leaves, her favorite scent, she looked up at him in surprise. "For you," he said. "You mentioned you liked tea. I remembered." The warmth of his thoughtfulness settled deep inside her. She held the tin gently, as if it were something precious. On their way back, the sky grew cloudy and drops of rain began falling. Caleb stopped the wagon and pulled a blanket from the back, handing it to her so she wouldn't get cold. He didn't shield himself first. He didn't worry about the rain hitting his shoulders. His first thought was always her comfort. When they reached the ranch, the rain had turned into a gentle shower. They hurried inside, laughing softly as they shook the water from their clothes. It was the first time Elena had heard Caleb laugh, really laugh. It was warm, quiet, and full of life. Something inside her relaxed even more. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. Elena brewed the tea he bought, and they sat by the fireplace, listening to the rain. She found herself speaking more about her parents, her town, her struggles. She didn't share everything, but she shared enough for Caleb to understand why she carried so much fear. Caleb listened without interrupting. He didn't try to correct her feelings or tell her she was wrong to worry. When she mentioned how she used to work long days without rest, he said softly, "You won't live like that here." When she described how she had always been afraid of disappointing the people she lived with, he replied, "You don't have to earn your place here. It's already yours." The sincerity in his voice was gentle and steady. Elena felt something loosen around her heart, something that had been tight for years. As the evening approached, she stood at the window, watching the rain slow to a soft drizzle. Caleb came up beside her, but kept enough distance to let her breathe. After a quiet moment, she turned to him and asked the question that had lived inside her since the day she got his first letter. "Why did you choose me? Out of all the women who could have written to you?" He looked at her with calm eyes, the same calm she had seen in him from the first moment they met. "Because," he said slowly, "your letters sounded honest. You wrote the truth, even when it was hard, and I knew I wanted someone who wasn't pretending." Elena's breath caught. "But you didn't even know me." "That's true," he admitted. "But I didn't need to know everything at once. I only needed to know that you wanted a chance at a better life. I hoped we could build that life together. Elena looked down at her hands. I was afraid. I still am. I know, Caleb said gently. And I don't expect that fear to vanish. You can take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She lifted her head, searching his face for a single sign of impatience or frustration, but there was none, only softness. And Elena, he added quietly. I don't need a servant or someone to work until they're exhausted. I need someone who wants to stay, not because they're afraid, but because they feel safe. His words hit her heart like a warm light breaking through clouds. For so long, she had believed she had nothing to offer except work. No one had ever told her she was wanted simply for her presence. Something inside her broke, not with pain, but with release. Her eyes warmed, though she didn't cry. She simply breathed out slowly, deeply, for the first time in years. That night she sat on the porch alone for a moment, staring at the soft glow of the lantern hanging by the door. The wind was gentle, brushing against her skin like a quiet comfort. She thought about everything Caleb had done, not dramatic gestures, not large promises, but steady kindness. Kindness that never pushed her, never demanded, never frightened her. Slowly, she whispered to the wind, I think I can stay. The words slipped out naturally, almost without her thinking. And once they were spoken, she knew they were true. When Caleb stepped onto the porch a moment later, he didn't ask what she was thinking. He simply stood beside her, looking at the sky. She glanced at him and said softly, Thank you for being patient. He nodded once, gently. Thank you for trusting me, he replied. The quiet between them felt peaceful. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of two people building something steady and real. As the night deepened, Elena realized something she had never expected when she boarded that train. She was no longer counting the days, waiting to understand her place. She had found it slowly, through patience, kindness, and small moments that felt bigger than she could explain. She wasn't staying because she had nowhere else to go. She was staying because the ranch had become a safe place, and Caleb had become someone she could share her life with, not as a servant, not as a frightened guest, but as someone who was finally learning what it meant to belong.